Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. The season is officially back underway. FP1 and FP2 are done at Bahrain. Lewis Hamilton topping the timesheets with the Mercedes 1-2 in FP2. What does that mean for the remainder of the weekend? Hamilton very confident in Mercedes' progress, it seems, now over the winter. How much damage can they do this weekend? But also, again, Christian Horner majorly under the spotlight. Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Just got into the hotel here at Barcelona because I'm going away for a few days, so apologies that the video is a little bit later than normal, but man, we have a lot to dive into. So Horner was asked about the investigation. We saw everything that happened yesterday. He was cleared of all wrongdoing by the internal investigation, external investigation that Red Bull had done. He commented on the matter, of course, today, but that was not the end of the story. I told you guys it wouldn't be the end of the story, and here we are today. Now, I did want to mention quickly what Eric Van Haren and TacticalRab said about the matter, because they put out their article. Of course, it was Eric and TacticalRab that were the first people to report the, sexual misconduct allegations against Christian Horner. The interesting part was, in their article about the situation, they effectively doubled down on what they had said previously, because as they say in the article, he was accused of sexually transgressive behaviour by a Red Bull employee. It was previously revealed the woman in question, whose name is known to the editors, is considering further legal action. Before the outcome of the investigation going to court was already discussed, she's already, she currently has the option for first appeal to the verdict to the lawyer, who has now cleared Horner. So they doubled down on this, and then they go on to say at the end of the article, so apart from the legal aspect and whether the reporting star persists or not, the camp battle at the top of Red Bull also plays a big role in the near future. In the coming weeks, will the protagonists pretend that nothing is wrong and that all noses are in the same direction? It's the Oscar nominations are already known, because that had been an acting masterpiece of the highest order. So pretty much the Telegraph have doubled down and said, look, what we said is true, and they haven't denied it. That's actually what he goes on to say later in the article, that nobody has actually refuted these allegations, although of course Horner himself denies it, and then saying that there is a major power struggle behind the scenes at Red Bull, to such an extent that for them to pretend otherwise would take acting of the highest order. So then Toto Wolff came out with a statement and said, look, read the statement, it wasn't especially transparent from Red Bull's side, and maybe it shouldn't be. Of course, it's legal processes, you can only say so much, but obviously Toto gives his thoughts on it, and any chance to get a dig in at Horner, the option will be there. But then we got the bombshell. Obviously, we'll discuss practice in a second, but this was happening during FP2 as I was on the plane. But we then had reports that just after all this has been happening, an email arrived in the inbox of basically every single high-level journalist, every team principal, Stefano Domenicali, Liberty Media, everyone involved in the sport, pretty much at that high level, received an email in their inbox with what would supposedly be the evidence against Horner, presumably the same evidence that Eric Van Haren says that he's seen, and therefore is why he's kind of very persistent in terms of what he's going and reporting today. And let's not forget, by the way, the Telegraph must have, from their perspective, confirmed this evidence to be valid for them to say what they said. And now the question is the evidence actually valid? They're WhatsApp messages, basically, that have been going around. I'm not going to share them in the video because I don't know if they're real or not as it stands, and that is what remains for, well, the journalists to try and figure out. But you've got to say that whoever's done this, whoever's sent this Google Drive containing all of the Christian Horner evidence to, like, every single journalist that's involved in the space, they, first of all, must have access to all of the emails of all of the top parties. Like, all of the team principals, Liberty Media, Stefano Domenicali, many others, all of the journalists, people have got this document. I haven't actually had the chance to check my email yet to see if I've got it, but I probably don't. It doesn't really matter because they're leaking around WhatsApp messages, other photos. They may be, fake news. It may be generated somehow, and Jennifer isn't going to share this information yet till such time they've validated the authenticity of this information. But, I mean, you've got to say, it's just so wild, especially because just yesterday he was acquitted, or at least, confirmed there was no wrongdoing or whatever by this investigation that apparently was very transparently followed behind the scenes. And then just the very next day, it's so obvious, right, that somebody at Red Bull wants him gone. And whether what we see here is true or not, we don't know. But that's what Joe Soward says. Well, here we have it. The full meltdown. The F1 world has just been sent half the story. If the whole story comes out, it's going to be really ugly. I've heard some rumours on what the whole story around this might be. I'm not going to comment on it yet, as and when potentially things start to emerge over the coming days. But as I've said previously, there is more to come on this. And clearly the journalists in the space are aware of, what's actually been going on here behind the scenes. So it's an absolute madness. And as Joe says, quite clearly, somebody at Red Bull is desperate to get Horner booted out. And they are stopping at absolutely nothing to make that happen. So, of course, this happened while Horner was in the paddock, FP2, prime time of the day. And Horner has to then come out and say, well, I'm not going to comment on any of this anonymous speculation, and says that, obviously he doesn't say much, does he? But he's obviously responding to this situation. So, yeah, wild turn of events. As I say, every day I'm sure there'll be some sort of update on this. It might even happen later on this evening. But of course, we also have to discuss the actual on-track running for the day, because it was fascinating from pretty much from start to finish. First of all, every team has brought some degree of an upgrade this weekend compared to what they had last weekend of the test. Usually happens, teams bring in all sorts of stuff. So Red Bull, Mercedes, everything, there's new ideas, and some of them were used at the test and just not written down quite as of yet, for example. And as Charles Leclerc says, the SF24, he's much happier in it than the SF23. Does note, though, that there is some understeer still in the lower speed corners that he's not a massive fan of. So there are some things for Ferrari to work on, and I feel like Ferrari didn't quite show their full hand today at testing. The feeling is that they left a little bit on the table to, tomorrow in qualifying, that's when we're really going to see where the pace of these teams lie. But the feeling was during testing that Mercedes, of every team, apart from maybe Red Bull, let's be honest, were probably leaving the most on the table. Their fuel load seemed to be high, their power unit mode seemed to be rather low, and it just felt like Mercedes weren't showing their full hand. They did, by the way, revert to the higher wishbone position on the front suspension, which their simulations said it would perform better, and that's exactly what they saw when they hit the track on the final day of testing with the opposite version, which, didn't work out for them quite so well. This, by the way, is the Red Bull up close, as Andrew Benson describes it, almost certainly this year's World Championship winning car, and still the data of today, from a long-run perspective, paints that picture. But on the single lap pace, we actually have a very interesting situation. He even mentioned that Andrea Stella, team principal of course of McLaren, had just said wow when he saw this Red Bull. So yeah, it's quite the spectacular looking thing, and it goes pretty quick as well. But Verstappen, this is when you know Formula 1 is officially back. FP1 starts, Verstappen just puts in a lap that puts in P1, and he says, the car's terrible, everything's off, it's miles off, it's awful, talking about the gear shifting and everything. So whatever the issues are with this gearbox and the shifting, they've been maintained year on year. The feeling was that based on the way that Red Bull packaged last year's car, they had to design a really small gearbox, and that was causing them issues. Let's not forget Saudi Arabia qualifying. Let's not forget during the Grand Prix in Bahrain last year, when apparently both Verstappen and Perez were very close to having to retire from the race because their gearbox was playing up. So it seems like in order to do the miracles that Red Bull have done, they do have to compromise in some areas. Part of that is on the gearbox, which is apparently still causing some problems. But of course, last year, it caused that many problems in it, to which point they still won basically all of the races. So I'm sure Verstappen will take it, and he was still the fastest man out there on track today from a long-run perspective. But the McLarens were competitive. The Astons were competitive. And then we know where the Ferrari and the, of course, Mercedes are going to sit. What was very notable, though, is how the RB looked, the Racing Bull, the Toro Rosso, the Visa Cash App, whatever you want to call it, because FP1 was led by Mr. Daniel Ricciardo. Now, he was the only man, the top four did their laps on soft tyres. I think the fifth fastest guy was actually Alonso on the mediums, so that's quite telling potentially for tomorrow. But, look at the gap here. Imagine if what we saw today in practice actually comes true in the Grand Prix in terms of the relative competitiveness of these cars this season, because people are looking at this and thinking, damn, and here we go. We've got a Red Bull, a Mercedes, a Ferrari, a Mercedes, and then, all of these guys within just a couple of tenths of each other, and then Tsunoda and Ricciardo a little bit further up the road. So Danny Rick put it P1 in the very first practice session of the season, and look, it's practice, right? You don't want to read into it too much, but it was Ricciardo leading Norris. And to be fair, there were some funny images going around of Mr. Zach Brown in the pit lane. We know that Zach Brown of McLaren has been the main opponent to Red Bull owning two teams in the way that they do. And we mentioned over the last several weeks, if not months, that he will be especially frustrated with the situation if they actually turn out to be really quick, this RB car. And of course, based on the evidence of first practice, the RB was, faster than McLaren. So that's probably something that he won't be especially pleased with. But these were the FP1 results. Ricciardo from Norris, from Piastri, from Tsunoda. Those were the guys on the soft tyres. Then Alonso was P5, just ahead of Verstappen. But then Russell, Leclerc, Hamilton, all around the same kind of ballpark. So very interesting FP1 for sure. But again, as we do here on this channel, it's not all about the short run pace. It's also about the long run pace. This was the comparison, by the way, between Max and Checo. So on the medium tyre, Max did a few laps here, averaged to 1:37.8. Perez averaged to 1:38.3. So, early days, but if the gap between the two of them is really 0.5 of a second, it's not going to look pretty for Perez this season, especially if that is, verified, I suppose, in qualifying as well when we get there tomorrow. This was the comparison as well to the Mercedes guys. So Verstappen, as we saw, 137 high, shall we say. Hamilton was also averaging not too dissimilar. So he was on a 137.575, 80.80. So, a bit more tyre degradation there on the Mercedes than the Red Bull, but still the average lap times between Lewis, Russell and then Verstappen weren't too dissimilar to what Verstappen was actually putting down. But FP2 was arguably even more interesting, especially from the Mercedes side. Now, it was firstly worthy of note that, again, Mercedes is running their car very low to the ground. This was obviously against performance. If you can do it, if your car is capable of running low to the ground, that's what Red Bull have done as far as they can for the last couple of years. Notably, of course, Red Bull at Spa last year had to tell Verstappen and Perez to lift up Raikkonen because otherwise they'd bottom out too much on the floor and burn away that plank at the bottom, right, which of course is not allowed to wear, as Mercedes and Ferrari found out very much so at Austin last year. So when the teams can, they will run the cars low. But of course, you can't run the car too low or the floor plank wears too much and therefore you're disqualified for the Grand Prix. So, Mercedes have experienced that and I guess we'll see what they do because, the Mercedes is sparking all over the place. It's beautiful for the cameras. But if I'm Mercedes, I'm thinking, okay, are we okay? Like, are we going to get away with the ruling on this that we might not otherwise be able to do? But clearly, they can generate the performance now and actually handle having the car super low, which has not been the case of Mercedes really for the last couple of years. And that was a positive sign, first of all, especially when Hamilton goes P1 almost straight away. Purple, straight to the top of the timesheets. And as Mercedes continue to dial in that short run pace, basically what Andrew Chauvelin said after FP2 was that during the tests, they recognised their long run pace was pretty respectable. It was their short run pace they wanted to work on. So they did a lot of work over the last few days in the simulator and elsewhere, trying to figure out, okay, what can they do to get more competitive over a single lap? And it seems to have worked because Mercedes ended this session with a 1-2. I mean, this is how it finished up here with Hamilton on a 1:30.3, which was actually faster than his qualifying time last year. Last year's pole was like a 1:29, 8 or something in that ballpark. And the Mercedes, of course, was quite a way off the pace. So Hamilton from Russell on the soft tyre, then Alonso, Sainz, Piastri, Verstappen in P6, even Hülkenberg up here in P7, and of course Alpine, by the way, nowhere to be found. Worthy of note because earlier in the day, there were rumours going around that Alpine are losing 0.5 a second a lap because 1, their engine is crap, and 2, their car is overweight. So Alpine are just chalked, and their long run pace is shocking, and the drivers are complaining. It's just a disaster. But so Hamilton ended up fastest on the day. So obviously we were thinking, oh my god, like we're going to have a season on our hands, right? And maybe that's what the data indicates in qualifying. Again, it's got to be said, if you look at the long run data, the Red Bull is still clear. And actually, the McLaren was very competitive. We don't really know still what engine modes teams are running, how much fuel they've got in the car. Same with testing, right? So we can't really fully read into this. But the feeling is that Red Bull are still a good few tenths of a second away on race runs. That is the evidence of what Verstappen had today as well. And, his race runs on the soft tyre were a good few tenths clear of what anybody else could do. But it is still very interesting to note a confident Mercedes team feeling like they're, back to form, and to win the day 1-2 was, I'm sure, a bit of a surprise for them, absolutely, and whether they can take that confidence going forwards. Because, as Hamilton says, he was just really happy with the way the car felt. Let's not forget, it was only, it was the W13, right, where he did that interview that he didn't really know was live, and he said, this car is terrible, or whatever he said. And that's basically what Hamilton said for the last 2 years. But as he says, feeling okay today, made some improvements over the session, shocked to see us where we are right now, and, can't get ahead of ourselves, need to keep our heads down, working on the setup, trying to extract more. I think our long run pace is nowhere near the Red Bulls, but we're a lot closer, so, we've got some work to do out there. But as he goes on to say, I'm much happier with the car this year. My seating position is finally further rearwards. I've got a better feel for the car approaching the corners. There are other areas as well that have been improved and fixed. Feels like a race car for once. The last two didn't feel like that, so it's a great platform. And we've never heard Mercedes really come up with confident words like this at the start of the season, talking about how they've designed things again pretty much from the ground up, and like there's more steps that Mercedes will need to take. They need to bring downforce, they need to bring other elements to the car. But I feel like on the evidence of today, and we'll see what happens the next couple of days, but on the evidence of this Friday, we might be in a position where at some point this season, these teams, Ferrari and probably Mercedes especially, are going to be able to develop to a point where they can actually try and compete with Red Bull, right? If Red Bull aren't absolutely miles clear, and these teams are confident in where they stand, we should have some sort of fight on our hands at some point. I would at least hope. But that's what Hamilton says, that, yeah, Ferrari, Aston, McLaren, it's really close. So I think, again, come Bahrain, which is obviously coming up in a couple of days, on the Saturday it's the race, more than likely it's going to be a mega fight again for P3, really. But or maybe P2 if Perez is some way off the pace. So just some long run numbers that I've just seen turn up here on Twitter, so I thought I'd mention for you guys. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.